I'm going to say this at the very beginning of the video, before the title screen even plays, to make sure everyone hears it, and maybe I'll be able to prevent this from happening for once. Except when 7 people decide to do it ironically just to spite me. Y'all aren't original. It's a really common occurrence in my videos that I, as a writer, anticipate a common counter-argument or objection to what I'm saying once I've gotten the main idea communicated, so I then spend the next part of the video addressing that counter-argument and explaining why I disagree with it, despite the fact that, given all I've said so far, it would seem to be valid. Thing is, a lot of the time, people don't last that long in the video. The average viewer doesn't watch the video all the way through, which is pretty standard on YouTube and probably everywhere else. This number is, of course, influenced by anyone who clicked on the video, decided it wasn't what they wanted to watch, and clicked off. But there's a really weird pattern where people will not watch the whole video, yet nevertheless leave a comment arguing against a point I make. And a lot of the time, these comments were directly addressed in the video. I could just reply to the comment with a timestamp to the part of the video where I addressed them. Sometimes it's not even about a point I make, but just a point they think I'm making, something the video isn't about at all. This is a problem with society, with our current generation, and with our moment in human history. So let's talk about it on my Splatoon YouTube channel. In case I've failed, and some of you still don't know who FLC is, he's an analyst whose ideas have probably been more influential on the way competitive players in the West play Splatoon than any other individual person. One of his most well-known contributions is an essay called Fluid Priorities and Roles in Splatoon 2, where he defines terms like Anchor, Slayer, and Skirmisher that the community still uses very widely today, and that I've echoed repeatedly in my own videos. The single most successful video on my channel is a video where what I'm doing is summarizing this essay in video form. That's not quite all of what I'm doing, but it's a lot of it. Like I stress repeatedly in my video on the subject, the roles FLC is talking about are temporary. They're roles that you step into when you're the one in position to do the job. If someone's shooting at you and a teammate is nearby to help you, you're the skirmisher now, whether you're playing dually squelchers, a splatter shot, or an explosher. If someone's shooting at your teammate and you're in a position to help, you're the slayer now. Again, no matter what weapon you're using. Those roles are going to switch as many times as the opponent turns to start shooting at someone else to ensure that you get that 2v1 win cleanly, without them managing to trade someone back. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to look at a weapon and say, that weapon is a skirmisher. It's helpful to establish that a weapon is good at skirmishing. I'd rather be playing the dually squelchers if I have to be dodging shots than the other weapons I listed earlier. Maybe when your team rolls out, that weapon that skirmishes well is going to want to engage the enemy team by default to create an opportunity for a teammate to play the Slayer role, but by calling a weapon a skirmisher, we've accidentally given people the idea that that's the only thing they should be trying to do, limiting and oversimplifying their decision-making. FLC has repeatedly expressed frustration with the way this essay and the information in it was processed and implemented by players. In his Discord, where he shares the link to it, he's captioned it as the doomed guide that made people start putting skirmisher in their Twitter bios because I didn't state clearly enough that, and here he quotes the article itself, you do not play the same role for the entire game. Bear in mind that the text he's quoting is bolded, in some cases in a different text color, and is repeated multiple times before the explanation of those roles begins. For TOs, teachers, anyone who's had to communicate information to a public audience in preparation for an upcoming task, this is, as the kids say, relatable. Just because helpful information is available doesn't mean anyone's ever going to read it. I have a number of theories about why this is so broadly the case. I'm not going to include obvious exceptional cases like the person who's trying to read it has dyslexia or ADHD, because yeah, obviously that's going to make it more challenging to get through a text, but it's not just a problem that's happening for people with those kinds of conditions. One reason is necessity. We don't have time to read everything that's given to us. I had a professor in college assign an entire novel for us to read in 2 days. And with all my other homework and classes, I just didn't get to do anything else for those 2 days while I read it. This sort of task really incentivizes skimming instead of reading, if not just going online and finding a summary to read instead. I can't say I really blame my classmates who chose not to suffer through it the way that I did. It's a common tactic by both of the major parties in US politics to bury something in a bill that's hundreds of pages long that doesn't have to do with the stated purpose of the bill at all, counting on Congress people to be unwilling to read thoroughly enough to catch a few paragraphs that do something they otherwise wouldn't have signed off on.
If you want to do something evil, put it inside something boring.
Another reason is a culture that emerges in schools. Most people have had an experience at some point where they procrastinated or forgot about an assignment and needed to do the best work they could with an insufficient amount of time to do it. This happens regardless of how advanced the student is. At some point, you just kind of end up flying blind. You have to get through a class discussion without having read the chapter it's about the night before. Maybe that means you ask a friend what it was about, or look up a study aid online before class, or just skim it really quickly without processing it very much. The teacher can only call on each student so many times during the course of a single class period, so you'll only have so many questions you need to answer or tasks to complete, and a lot of the time people actually manage to muddle through this kind of a situation and it feels like a relief. It also, after the adrenaline has worn off a little, makes a lot of people wonder, if I can avoid being penalized for not spending an hour reading this, why spend an hour reading it? What follows for some people is a confirmation of why people are learning in the first place. They decide that I'm reading because I need to practice reading to prepare for college, or because this reading is teaching me skills I want to learn for intrinsic reasons, or even just because they need to improve their grades in that class. For a lot of others, though, it becomes an exploit that they brag about to their friends. It's a great story, after all. It took some cleverness to successfully answer questions designed to test their understanding of a text they haven't read. There are emotional stakes. What if they get caught? What if another student finds out and laughs about it? What if they get in trouble? It's also got a bit of a punk anti-establishment edge to it. Pulling one over on a teacher, especially a teacher you don't like, can make you feel like you had agency in a situation where you should have been under control according to the system. Getting away with it is something people are often proud of, even though in terms of learning the material, it's totally counterproductive. Over time, it's easy to find that pride to be a compelling reward that only encourages the behavior. For those of you who have very recently been in school, which is someone more likely to brag to you about? Getting an A in a class, or getting an A in a class without doing any of the assigned reading? I can't speak for you, but I personally have heard a lot more of the latter than the former. Sometimes there's value in working smarter, not harder. There are stories all over about engineers using scripts to automate data entry work that used to take hours manually and cut it down to a 5-minute task. But every now and then you're going to encounter documents that demand your full attention. You do not skim a contract you have to sign, because you will be held to the terms of that contract, and your signature will tell everyone that you've read it, and that you understand what you're signing on for. At that point in time, you are held responsible for the contract legally. You do not skim safety instructions for potentially dangerous equipment, or medicine you're going to need to use. And if you need to develop a proper understanding of a skill you're trying to learn, skimming it will not save you time in the long run. Skimming will only make it take longer to really learn what you're reading. There's an old saying in carpentry, measure twice, cut once. Make sure you know exactly what you're doing and double-check thoroughly before it's time to commit to actually sawing a wooden board apart, because the extra precaution of ensuring you get it right the first time has the potential to save you much more time preventing another stop at the hardware store for a new board than it wastes if the extra measurement wasn't actually necessary. So too with reading. If you skim over a passage 3 times and miss the same important detail each time, you've learned less and also wasted more time than if you slow down and process each sentence, each clause, each word as much as you need to actually understand it. Errors caused by a failure to focus and really process what's being heard or read are normal for kids. Nobody starts off being able to listen attentively to an hour-long lecture with no visuals. It takes practice and brain development before a child is capable of even a fraction of that amount of focus. A teacher once told me that if I haven't repeated something 5 times in a middle school classroom, that the class hasn't actually learned it. And so I found ways to work repetition into my lesson plans. This is why sometimes I cover concepts on the channel that I already have videos about. The writer in me is hesitant to flood the internet with something people have already seen and maybe risk losing their interest, but that's not how I think it really works. For one thing, most people don't watch all of my videos, and repeating something will probably expose a lot of viewers to the concept for the first time. But also, the teacher in me views repetition as reinforcement, as review, as practice, as that thing that's going to make everyone's quiz grades better than they'd be otherwise. That being said, I think outside of what you'd normally just expect from kids, and outside of these other reasons, there's also a generational trend toward consuming information in a less focused way due to the media diet that people get online. Before this line of thinking goes any further, let me just make this crystal clear. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The kids are going to be better than us. That's the way it's always been. And their kids will be better than them. We are the giants whose shoulders they stand on, but they get to learn from our mistakes. And one day others will be standing on their shoulders. I do not have a negative opinion of younger generations than mine overall. What I'm saying here is a specific criticism. It's the result of unique challenges that they face in their time, just as we face unique challenges in our time. That out of the way, generations of people who have grown up with social media their whole lives have been shaped by it more than people who didn't have it as kids. That access has shaped the ways people talk to each other. For business reasons, social media platforms trend toward higher volume content, stuff you can consume really quickly so they can show you new stuff sooner. It's easier to focus on Twitter when you're only going through 3 sentences in fairly casual English before you get to look at something else. Videos are fundamentally more engaging than text, so it's easier to get through longer content in video form, especially when the content creator knows what they're doing. But the videos also take a long time to make, so content that's even the length of a typical class period is pretty rare. It's great that people are getting exposed to the opinions of others and having a voice in public discourse earlier on. But that discourse doesn't prepare them for everything they're going to have to read and understand. It's like we're asking kids to run for 5 minutes without stopping once a day, and expecting them to suddenly be able to run 10 miles on some future day. Combine that with the previously discussed incentives to skim rather than thoughtfully read, and you've got a combination of influences that leads people to fail to process important details in what they read more often, and jump to more cursory conclusions. As a subject becomes more complex and requires more and more expertise to understand it, you reach a point where high-volume discourse is never going to do the topic justice. Debate, in particular, has really suffered from this current media environment. Any debate that's worth listening to is going to stay on the same topic for a significant amount of time, and really pick the subject apart from every angle. It's going to logically and meticulously work its way around all of the different perspectives, evaluating every inference, unpacking every implication, to make the best case that each side can. That's just not the way that debates work in any of the most viewed public forums right now. Network TV debates between presidential candidates are moderated abysmally compared to what you'd get in a high school debate competition. Pundits on talk shows get praised for tremendously uninformed positions because those positions are wild enough to turn heads, and then they aren't challenged in those positions in any effective or reasoned way. Streamers and YouTubers will shout, "Debate me!" at someone and strong-arm them into appearing on a show for that debate, only to be in an unmoderated environment where whoever farms the most clips of gotchas and angry reactions wins. And given that the streamer already has stream chat on their side, engaging with them at all is entirely counterproductive. Something we learned from Facebook is that we just can't trust social media to keep us informed. Anything we learn there, we need to verify. But the process of verification takes extra time, extra attention, and the necessary skepticism to consider that extra effort worth it. What if the text you were given to read in school contained errors, or made a flawed argument, and in your hurry to skim the text in preparation for being tested on it, you never considered it critically? Maybe you could have raised an issue with it that would have prevented misinformation from being spread to the rest of your class, but instead you just assumed that the misinformation was correct. It's less likely that you find accidental errors in a textbook, but it does still happen, and sometimes the way that, say, a history textbook represents certain sensitive subjects from a nation's history can be misleading. Failing to evaluate what you read because you're speeding through it just to get to understanding the information is dangerous. Outside school, people will take advantage of that inattention, of that lack of evaluation, to tell you something that you'd realize doesn't make sense if you thought about it for an extra 5 seconds before digesting more of it. Look, in terms of the information we're talking about, we're a long way out from Splatoon weapon rolls, but the same vulnerability that's exposed in us when we come to think that certain weapons have static rolls, the fact that we didn't read FLC's article closely enough before starting to use his language about how the game works, the fact that we're judging my videos in the comments before we even watch them, it can be used to convince us of weird, stupid, harmful things well beyond the scope of just our silly Squid game. When you're faced with a longer text, something that's important, or something you're intrinsically interested in learning from, instructions for how to complete a task, please slow down while reading it. Turn the ideas over in your head. Test yourself on them by wording them in a different way. Evaluate whether you agree with them. Whatever it takes to get you to actually understand. If you catch yourself, like I sometimes do, realizing you're glazed over and you're not sure what's going on anymore, don't just keep reading. Go back to the last part of the text you did fully process and start again from there. Don't miss the word not, don't insert words that aren't there. Focus. Work that mental muscle so you glaze over less often next time. Again, folks with dyslexia, ADHD, etc., it is still important, but I understand y'all will have more problems with this than most. And if you're planning on actually weighing in on a subject, sharing your opinion, make sure that opinion is informed. You're not obligated to watch an entire video of mine if you're not interested in it. But sometimes I'm pretty sure people type disagreements into the comments section having seen nothing but the thumbnail. I'm alright with rolling my eyes at that in my current line of work. I could even laugh about it if that were the only way it affected me. But I'm less okay with that being the way people engage with other aspects of their lives. Most of y'all are going to vote. If not now, then only in a matter of time. And you're going to make other important decisions as a working professional that require you to be informed and respond effectively to that information. At the end of the day, I can't laugh at people that I think are messing up or making uninformed decisions. I can't find it funny. I can't watch videos and memes that encourage me to laugh at it. Because other people's ignorance is my problem too. Other people's ignorance is everyone's problem.